how we should be handling, or what's the best way, the easiest way to handle stateful systems. So with databases, for example, or an SQSQ, let's say, right? The only way to isolate, the easy way to isolate it is to just have an ephemeral or separate copy that isolates the flow, and you link it at the deployment time of the sandbox. You link it, you pass, you inject the URL, let's say, the access information and all that. So you have it linked together. And I showed also a diagram where I had a database which was linked to the sandbox, and it was completely separate. The other example that I showed where I noted our core platform queue. That was it was fortunate that for different reasons when we designed this, before even introducing sandboxes and this path based on headers and different routing, this service was actually what it does. It maps the asynchronous semantics to HTTP to synchronous API semantics. So there is a producer component and a consumer component, and in between they have a Kafka cluster. So the microservices that want to send a message, they just call the API, the synchronous API of the producer. The producer will obviously noting the topic and all this information. And then on the other side, you have this Hermes consumer components that asynchronously read from topics in Kafka. And through configuration of the actual microservices that want to listen to the topics, they just reach out and call an API call to a listener service, and it's still HTTP. So it was easy for us to, through this transformation of the asynchronous semantics to synchronous semantics, just to propagate the headers, the HTTP headers. So that was easy. So we didn't have to create an isolated copy of a queue. In all other places, and I'm talking about our experience, we do have to provision an isolated queue or stateful resource, like a data store or database. So I will hand it over to you, Anirudh, if you have any more context about other options.
Yeah, I think that generally covers it. Like there is two approaches here. On one, and probably the easier one for people to get started with might be having an isolated message queue, like isolated topic in a message queue or something like that, and link up your producer and consumer workloads to it and deploy that as a unit. So that now is like it's one combined entity where you don't have to worry about tenancy within that, right? So the slice itself can contain that. The alternative is a bit more involved. That involves uh, teaching consumers to consume selectively, which I think was one of the solutions that you had mentioned earlier as well. So that is like as long as tenancy is being passed through the entire queue, which is something that the OpenTelemetry project already supports. If each of the consumers is aware of their own tenancy, then it doesn't even need that kind of isolation, and it comes very, very straightforward. So I think it's more of a journey where mostly you start from full isolation and then move towards this model of selective consumption.